All right, for much more on the airline industry, Mike Boyd join us now to talk about aviation concerns, safety, low-cost carriers, a little bit of everything. He is an aviation security analyst at Boyd Group Aviation Consulting. First of all, good to see you, Mike. Good to see you again. This situation with Germanwings, we now know that they've got the second box and they haven't been able to access it as of yet because it's been so badly damaged. But what they do know from his iPad is that he searched ways to break through the cockpit door. He searched issues related to suicide. Does that make it premeditated, do you think?
I think whether it's premeditated murder or premeditated suicide, it certainly was premeditated. We also have reports that he was on antidepressant medication, which is also something he shouldn't have been flying with. So I think we have the answers with or without that burned black box.
If my job involved driving a bus, flying a plane, or doing something of importance where people's safety is in jeopardy, and I'm prescribed drugs, should the doctor tell its employer or their employer that, hey, I prescribed these drugs to your employee, and maybe you can help keep an eye on him or her?
I think in the U.S., a doctor would probably go to jail for doing that. We have strict laws against that. But the employee itself, taking any kind of medication, they're supposed to do it. But let's remember, this was a one-off. We don't have time bombs in cockpits all across the United States or the EU. We have one situation where a pilot went very bad, and that caused a huge accident.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point you bring up. We have to remind people the statistics show that obviously flying is very safe, and this is a one-off incident. One of the things that have been brought up is this whole two-pilot situation. When one pilot leaves for whatever reason, another person sits in that chair. Does that ultimately resolve some of the concerns for those that do have concerns on this?
Yeah, I think it would resolve some of the concerns, but if you have the remaining pilot in the cockpit who really wants to do something bad, the first victim would be that flight attendant sitting in the other seat. So it's a help, but it's not a panacea for someone who, quite frankly, falls off the trolley. And that doesn't happen often, but yeah, it's one of those things where we have to do what we have to do to make it safer.
One of the discussions we've had in the past is about how there's not enough pilots in the world. And one issue that's been brought up, well, if you need more pilots, you've got to train them. To train them well and train them fast, there's always concern about the quality. So when you have low-cost carriers coming into the market, you've got a competitive space for sort of the mainline carriers, and we need all these new pilots. How do we make sure that all these new pilots that come into the system are well trained?
Well, they all meet standards. In the EU and the US, to be sure, they meet certain standards, and certainly in China as well. They meet government standards. So the way we adjust for fewer pilots, we fly less. So that's sort of an adjusting system that's going to work that way. But in terms of cutting corners, in most places of the world, certainly China, certainly the United States, and certainly in the EU, you're not going to find people cutting corners with training.
How about with maintenance? The low-cost carriers, I mean, they have to keep costs low, and some people, unfairly as it might be, might say, well, they are under the same maintenance requirements. That's not an issue, but ultimately, when you think about maintenance and there's a cost issue, we're going to give it out to one of the lowest qualified bidders. That shouldn't be a concern, right?
It absolutely should be a concern. I mean, 20 years ago, we had ValueJet, which was a terrible operation that literally did kill people, but we don't have that anymore. But we do have an issue with maintenance, and maintenance unions will tell you that when you send an airplane off to a facility, say, in Costa Rica that might do a good job, but where the people can't read the English manuals, we might have an issue.
That's a huge issue. I mean, it could be in any country. How do we resolve this? Why can't the airlines get together and say, hey, this is going to be the standard that we're going to follow by? I mean, is that a realistic possibility?
The airlines, in a condition like I just said, they have their own people there to make sure it's done right. But when the rule says, for example, that the supervisors must read and speak English, well, I can speak Mandarin to some degree, but I wouldn't know how to read a technical manual. So they have to have their own people on the property. And they're doing that, but I do have questions about it.
You think about the maintenance, I think of Boeing and Airbus. Obviously, they have plenty of experience in this matter. So does more need to be done on the side of maintenance, not just from the airline, but also from the manufacturer as well, to make sure that, and this is getting into tricky territory because everyone's sort of responsible if something were to go wrong.
No, there's no question about it, but Boeing, Airbus, Mitsubishi, every manufacturer as well as every airline, and certainly in the U.S., in the EU and in China, they know if you make a mistake and there's a crash, it's very expensive. So they know good maintenance is good business, and I think that's the direction they go. We're still dealing with humans who can make mistakes, but I would have no hesitation to get on an airline in any of those countries.
All right, Mike Boyd joining us once again, Aviation Security Analyst at Boyd Group Aviation Consulting. It's good to see you. Thank you very much on this important topic.